Dre, pronouns he, him, calling in from aluminum lobsters or maybe Alabama. I'm trying to understand the atheist position better while also expressing my position as a theist. This could be a really productive conversation. Dre, you're on the AXBs. How are you doing?
Hold on. I gotta test you, Dre. Roll Tide.
Oh, for sure. You know.
Nice.
The correct answer is Roll Tide, but okay, let's go.
That's fine.
Well, first I want to thank you guys for having me. This is definitely a pleasure. So
thank you, Dre.
I've learned a lot about atheists. I once was almost an atheist. I grew up in a Christian church, and I learned a lot about the Christian church and the Christian theology. And I disagree with a lot of the teachings from Christian theology, but I also disagree with a lot of the teachings from philosophy as well. But first, I want to understand why are you guys atheists?
Yeah, it's simply that we don't have a good reason to believe in a God. We haven't been given anything. By the way, the bottom of the screen here says hi him instead of he him, but that's just a typo. But yeah, it was just simply we don't have a good reason to believe in a God. We don't have any evidence for anything supernatural like that. The evidence that's been offered to us is woefully lacking. It's just not really compelling. It wouldn't be compelling for anything else ever. The kind of evidence that people give me for a God are things like visions and feelings and like these weird little logical conundrums that aren't really conundrums, and that wouldn't work in any other way, especially for such a big claim as you know, some supernatural divine creator of a whole universe. That's a very big thing that you should want a lot of evidence for. And finally, two other things, I guess. Number two, I don't have a use for a God. So like, I'm not really interested in one. I'm not looking for one. Even if you could demonstrate that one was real, I wouldn't really want to hang around with it. And then finally, I have no desire for a God. Again, if you could show me that one is real, I don't want anything to do with it. Any God that would run a universe like this is clearly insane. So I'm not willing to participate in that God's reality in that way. So yeah, the biggest and most important thing is just that we don't have a good reason to believe. No one's given us a compelling argument for it. And all the arguments so far have done the opposite of convinced us. They've driven us further away.
Yeah, and just to add mine on here, like I just don't see the evidence that warrants the belief. That's why I remain agnostic atheist. As far as the general God idea goes, I remain agnostic. Like I just simply don't know whether or not one exists. But for specific definitions, I remain like a hard atheist, which would mean that I actively disbelieve that those gods exist. So, and that's because like I take the Bible or the Quran or any of those things to be sort of like requirements manuals or requirements statements for those particular definitions of God, and because those don't comport with what we see in reality, that means that they just simply cannot exist as described in those holy books. So I actively don't believe in those, but I remain agnostic on a general concept of a God.
Okay. So what I like to do is I like to get back to the root of anything. Do you guys look at history and logic and consistency and apply that to your perspective, your worldview?
Yeah.
I want to say yes, but I want to make sure I'm understanding what you mean. When you say like look at history and logic, like do you mean that like we have like a historical context for stuff and that matters to us? Or like I don't go back and check history to make sure that I know, like, you know, if the lights are on in the room. I want to understand what you mean by that. And I'm sorry if that's a stupid question, but sometimes people give us weird little gotchas. So could you explain what you mean?
All right. So an example would be like, okay, I'm a Muslim. I believe the Quran. But historically, why should I even believe in a God? You know, if there's something that people even done.
Well, hold on. If I can interrupt, how about let's not posit about a Muslim, like this fictitious Muslim. Why don't you tell us why you believe in your particular version of God?
Okay, first off, I believe in the Bible, 100%, everything in it true. And the conversations prior to mine were, you know, pretty good, pretty decent. I could probably answer those questions you guys have better than those guys before me. But one thing I do notice is that the general public, which mostly every Christian has the wrong understanding of the scriptures, you know, and the main perspective is not the true perspective of the scriptures. So the reason I believe in the scriptures is because, you know, I can see consistency in history and logic. There's no other truth to it.
Okay. If I can interrupt, what piece of history comports with what the Bible says?
A lot of it, actually. So we go into peeling back the layers, like I said before, going back to the roots. You know, we see lies. We see lies, and we see the Bible being attacked. You know, that right there speaks.
This is not history. Tell me what historical event in the Bible it has been proven to be an actual historical event, like in history.
Well, we got the mount that Moses, the Mount Sinai, is still burnt. You know, that was a historical event in the Bible. It's still burnt to this day.
Is it?
And
no,
is it?
Can't tell you why.
No, they can, but you know that's not true.
So, John, if you want to,
yeah,
I have.
Yeah, John, do you want to dig into that a little bit, because I have a totally different question. I don't want to derail you.
Right. So the whole the Mount Sinai being burnt thing, this comes from I don't think it's Ron Wyatt, but it's like a Ron Wyatt specific like type of person. You know, the claim is that Iran basically allowed recently people to come in and photograph the top of Mount Sinai, and the top of Mount Sinai is still burnt. But what they're not telling you, whoever this is that is actually naturally explained just by the minerals and everything that's there, and how that mountain formed and everything like that. Like, it's all naturally explained. So it's not like God's hellfire that is still burnt the top of the mountain. It's just a natural explanation for why the top of the mountains look like that. So that's not actually proof of God. And the fact that we can explain that with natural processes means that a supernatural God wizard guy is ruled out. So you're going to need to come up with a better historical event than that.
Technically, it doesn't rule out, simply because you're talking about a spiritual essence manifesting in the physical world. Therefore,
which is magic.
Apply physical texture. It's not magic.
You're basically saying that magic trumps reality, and that's just simply not how anything works. Like, we know how like oxidization works. We also know how you know, rocks become different colors, and how different minerals can be worked into the rocks, and how that can change the colors and the appearance of the rocks, and all that kind of stuff. The area that particular mountain is contained in has very reasonable reasons as to why it is black on top, and it's due to the mineral composition of that area. So I mean, you're telling me that a magical wizard in the sky is a more likely conclusion than just actual science.
I also want to point out that, like, this whole time I've been looking for articles on Mount Sinai being burnt to try to glean something from this, and I have found a bunch of things about how Mount Sinai is burned. They're all referring to different mountains, and they're all pointing out, like, a bunch of them are talking about this one mountain in Saudi Arabia. And then there's a bunch more that are pointing out, like, that this isn't Mount Sinai, that this isn't what it would have been and where it would have been. And there's a bunch of biblical scholars on here that I found, like, this, you know, the BibleArchaeology.org talking about why this burned looking mountain is not Mount Sinai and doesn't count. And so, like, even the people who believe in the story, Dre, are disagreeing on which mountain we're even talking about and whether or not the burning is real. So, like, I understand this is your belief, and you're saying that every word in the Bible is true. That's its own big bag of problems. But, like, this one doesn't really do it for us. You're asking, you know, why are we atheists? This is a great example. You gave some evidence that works for you, and it took us 5 seconds of looking into it to come up with a bunch of better answers. And the thing that I think is really important for you to understand is that even if that didn't happen, even if John and I had no idea how this mountaintop came to looking the way that it did. Even if we didn't know, even if we were all pretty sure that that was actually supposed to be Mount Sinai, you're still offering a supernatural example. And the most unhinged, deranged, insane, crazy, over-the-top, multi-billion-dollar international conspiracy theory that exists in the real natural world is inevitably going to be a more reasonable assumption to make than magic. Does that make sense?
All right. I get where you guys are coming from. So you guys don't believe in any spiritual. So you don't believe that we are spiritual beings in a physical body. Y'all don't believe that at all either, huh?
No, and it's for the exact same reason. I don't have any evidence of a spirit or a soul or anything like that. I don't even know what that actually means, to be honest with you, because everybody tries to tell me something different. So no, I don't.
All right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna switch from any spiritual manifestation, since you guys don't believe. So if you don't even believe that you're a spiritual being or the spiritual realm or anything like that, we couldn't even have that conversation because you guys don't even have a basis of that ground. So I'll keep it, you feel me, all what we can see and observe.
Yeah.
All right. So
Dre, before you do, I just want to thank you for that, because that is incredibly fucking cool of you. I can't tell you how many times we get in a conversation like this and people cannot get off that ground and they cannot find common ground to have a conversation with. So that is incredibly cool of you to switch gears like that. Thank you very much.
No problem, man. No problem. All right. So we have the crucifixion. Let's go there. All right.
Okay.
In the crucifixion.
Yeah, sure.
In the Bible, it says that the sky went black when Christ died. Well, we have reports in Chinese saying that same thing on that same day at that same time. So, what's your argument with?
Are you talking about the eclipse?
They said it was an eclipse, but it wasn't an eclipse. The sky was black worldwide.
Okay.
No.
So
America when it's going on in Africa.
So let's I'm going to address that with you. Actually, you know what? I was going to give you something totally different, but I want to give you the respect you've just given me. Let's double check. I'm just going to Google right here, sky dark during crucifixion, because I think I know what you're talking about, but I want to make sure. Okay, so here's from Princeton. This is iconography and blah, blah, darkness spread over the land. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see if this gives us any details of what might be going on here. Here's a bunch of manuscripts. John, do you have something specific that you have like prepared on this? Because I think I know what Dre is talking about, but I want to double check on one thing that I think was happening.
Right. So I don't know of any Japanese, reports of like a worldwide thing. Sorry, what was that, Forrest?
He said Chinese.
Oh, Chinese. Sorry, Chinese. So outside of all that, I don't know of any reports of it, and I've researched like the evidence for the crucifixion quite extensively, and really the only evidence that we have the earliest evidence that we have is Paul saying that Jesus was crucified, but he doesn't really give us a good indication as to where this actually occurred, when it occurred, or anything like that. So we don't actually have any kind of good evidence to even say that Jesus, like a historical person named Jesus, was crucified by the Roman government at the behest of the Jewish Sanhedrin or the Jewish community in that area. But as far as the eclipse goes, that is a later invention in the Gospels. They invented this, and you even have sometimes people referring to either Phlegon or Thales as reporting that these things happen, but those are actually specifically stating that it doesn't make sense for these things to happen. And they also don't locate this supposed eclipse or this darkening of the sky to be anywhere near Judea. And we can also look at, the predictions of solar eclipses. NASA has some pretty good data on this, and there's no actual eclipses or anything like that occurred to go over the particular area of Judea when Jesus was supposedly crucified in either 30 or 33. So, I mean, there's just literally no evidence whatsoever for any of this stuff that you're saying. With the vague description that you've given here, as far as the Chinese evidence for a worldwide darkness, even if there was one that claimed to have some kind of worldwide darkness in it, we should be seeing reports from all over the world about a worldwide darkness at that particular time, and we just simply don't see that. So, I mean, you would have to have insanely good evidence, for this, and I just don't see that as existing.
Yeah, I have a couple of issues with it because I'll be honest with you, Dre, I haven't found anything. I've been Googling over here just to kind of like double check and see if I can find any of these, contemporary reports that you're talking about. I haven't found one. I found a couple of things about like some, Roman or Greek historians that wrote some stuff, but like that doesn't really do much for me because we have a few times where we're like, people would take the Bible and assume that it was history and then write it in a historical account using the Bible as a source rather than actually having any kind of eyewitness testimony. So like, I don't think, I don't have any reason to believe that. However, let's, play with it for a second. Let's assume that this did happen and that we have several cultures that mentioned that there was actually the skies going dark at this time. First question is, does that actually equate to a supernatural event? We have cultures all over the world that talk about dragons. Do we need to sit here and now believe that dragons are real? Probably not. We also can say that, lots of other cultures have flood stories. But we also see that links back to natural things. The flood stories don't sync up. Doesn't mean that there's a global flood. It usually has to do with them living near a water source like a river or something like that. So like that, there's usually a naturalistic explanation rather than a supernatural explanation. And finally, third and most importantly, even if we didn't know, and we just knew for sure that a bunch of people all over the world wrote down that the sky went dark at this time, that doesn't necessarily mean that there was a magical reason for that. That alone would require evidence. And well, I should say it this way. I'm sorry. I don't mean to backtrack what I'm saying, but like, even if we could say that there was a way that we knew that the whole sky went dark that we couldn't explain, that isn't then backing up evidence of Christ's divinity. It isn't evidence for Christ walking on water. It isn't evidence for Christ curing a leper. It isn't evidence for the existence of God. Each of those things are different claims that need their own evidence. And so even if I were to grant you that the sky went dark on this time, that doesn't tell me much. So to recap, because I know I just rambled a lot and I want to give you the fair shake of being able to address what I'm saying. I can't find anything that backs up what you're saying. Even if I could, and even if that was true, shit happens and people report it around the world, like dragons, for example. That doesn't mean you should believe it. And even if we could for sure say that the sky did go dark, that doesn't mean that it's supernatural, and that doesn't do anything for the rest of the divinity story. Those are my three contentions. We've been talking for a long time. Dre, what do you think about all that?
All right. So first off, which is why I asked you the question I asked you in the beginning before I even started to speak. Which you have to take history and logic and consistency to apply to your worldview. Which at this point it seems like you don't. It seems like if you see or hear something that doesn't equate to your worldview, you just dismiss it. Even if
no. Hold on. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, in all fairness, what I just demonstrated was logic and consistency. I didn't say I wouldn't believe this no matter what. I said I can't find any evidence for what you're saying, but assuming that it's true, assuming that this did happen, there are other explanations, and I don't have evidence in any direction, so it doesn't make any sense for me to accept the most fantastical explanation that goes against the rules of logic, like Occam's razor, for example, that goes against logic to do that. And even if it was something that was supernatural, that doesn't back up any other supernatural claims. So what I'm demonstrating here is logic and consistency, sir.
I got you. So I like to keep things very, very simple, man. I'm a smart guy, but conversation is very easy. More smooth when things are simplified. Just my way of doing things. So let's stick to the black sky thing just for a second. So what I mean when I say consistency, history, and logic. All right, so logically, we got the 3 laws of logic. The law of excluded middle. Logically, it's either true or false that the sky went black at this proclaimed time.
Sure.
Historically, we see this throughout multiple cultures claiming this around the same time. Consistently, we see this. We see this happening, and it's consistent with the scriptures. So therefore, we have to consider this to be true.
So
it's more like
so based on what you just said, again, I'm going to ignore whether or not this actually happened. Okay, because I can't find anything about it. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and say that this is real. Okay, we'll grant the premise. Does it make sense then to say this is an historical event that I don't have any other explanation for? And I have a lot of cultures saying this event definitely happened. So we're all going to agree the event happened. You don't have an explanation for it. Therefore, it must be magic. Because you can look at any number. There's video games that came out. Like I think Deus Ex is a video game that came out a long time ago. And it talks about the Twin Towers being destroyed in New York like a decade before it happened. That's prophecy, and therefore the video game is true, and therefore there are these cyborg people running around. That doesn't make any sense, right? New York is a real place, and the Spider-Man comics talk about New York. Therefore, the Spider-Man comics are true. That doesn't make any sense, right? So even if I grant you, yes, the sky went dark at this time, and multiple cultures all corroborate on this, something happened that made the sky go dark. That doesn't mean that it was a supernatural event. And even if it was one supernatural event, that doesn't justify belief in any other supernatural events. Every single one of these claims needs its own evidence. So for you to say, I believe the whole Bible because I have a couple cultures that mention that there was a dark sky at one time, that doesn't follow the rules of logic at all.
No, not at all. Not at all. That would be illogical to take one event that may be evidence for, to prove something and just take that event and run with it and say, oh yeah, all of it's true. That would be illogical to do. Completely. I completely agree.
Sure.
I completely agree. So let's just say,
so then if we can agree on that, can we also go back and agree that assuming it's a supernatural event is also illogical? Because that's my contention is even if I agreed with you that this happened, no, you don't think that that's illogical?
No, it's not illogical to say something is supernatural. That's not illogical at all. Why it's not illogical is not because of evidence of supernatural, but it's not illogical because the only reason you're saying that is because you don't have an explanation, but you still don't believe that you believe that everything is materialized. So if you only believe in the physical realm, then it's only logical to you because of your perspective, but that's not logic. Logic don't break off your perspective. In your perspective, spiritual things aren't true because you have no evidence of spiritual things. But it's not logical.
I'm so glad that you can presume what we fucking think right now. Like, I'm really shocked whenever a theist comes on here and presumes to know what we think, and you proclaim that we're only denying this because of one reason or another. Like, you don't know what I think. But regardless of that, we've perfectly explained what we think about this. Forrest has painstakingly gone through the logic on this. We've told you what we think, but you feel an inherent need in order to invent a reason. For what reason? Like, to placate yourself, to make yourself feel better about accepting this evidence? Like, it's definitely not an us thing. It's definitely a you thing in this particular situation.
No, what I said was, you guys don't believe in spiritual phenomena. You told me that out your own mouth. You don't believe in spiritual beings. You don't believe there's a spiritual realm. You told me that. I'm not assuming that. But that's what you said.
But Dre, I also told you why. I don't believe in those. It's because I don't have evidence for them. And so it's not that we're just rejecting this claim because it goes against our worldview. We don't have a reason to believe that anything supernatural exists in the first place. So it would be silly for us to then assume that there's a supernatural explanation for something that doesn't work. I can give an example, like just in science in general, right? If I were to prove, like, if I were to say that a thing evolved, for example, like that's what I like. I love evolution. It's my jam. So like, if I'm looking at some bug and I want to say, okay, well, this evolved, I can't just take that just because I want to. I have to first demonstrate that evolution is real, and I have to demonstrate how it works and what it does and all these different things that all play into what I'm now saying about this one individual organism, right? So for you to say, well, we need to accept this supernatural thing, we first have to show that supernatural things exist, and then we need to talk about what they can and can't do and why and all those things before we can then make the claim, well, obviously this thing is supernatural in order or in origin. Do you understand? Like that's the disconnect. It's not that we just don't want to believe. We already don't believe you, and then you're shoving in this new thing without any new evidence. That's a problem.
No, I never said that. I never said except supernatural. Remember, I said we're going to stay away from that. I never once said that. What I was saying was it's not logic to say because my worldview, spiritual phenomena don't exist. That means if I don't have an explanation, then I have to dismiss it. That's what we were talking about. I never once said except the supernatural. Never, not once. I said we was going to stay away from that. You asked
so
the blackness of the sky. You said let's go along. Hypothetically speaking, the sky actually turned black around 3180, and we have multiple reports of it. What you said then was, does that make it a supernatural event or something of that sort? You know, and I said, no. You asked, was it logical to say, hey, this still wasn't a supernatural phenomenon because we don't have evidence of supernatural phenomena. I said, no, it's not logical because your worldview says there's no evidence. I mean, there's no such thing as supernatural phenomenon. So therefore, based on your worldview, you're dismissing. That's what I said. You're dismissing you're dismissing.
I think I understand you, Dre, and I'm afraid that we might be talking past each other. So let me try to clarify. It's not my worldview that's in the problem here. The problem is evidence. So I don't have evidence of any supernatural thing. And so to then present something and say that it needs to be supernatural, that doesn't make any sense to me because I don't have a reason to assume that there's that anything's supernatural. If I don't think that's if I don't have evidence for a supernatural thing in the first place, why would I then attribute? It's as if to say, for example, there's a magical goblin that lives in my closet, and he is the reason why the sky went black. He has a big magical tarp that he pulled over the whole sky, and that's what happened. You would first need to accept the fact that this goblin exists and that there's such a thing as magical tarps and all that. There's a lot of baggage that comes with that claim. Meanwhile, there are plenty of very natural claims that we have evidence for. Maybe there was a volcano and it cast big clouds over there. Maybe there was a major storm that covered that whole part of the continent all across Eurasia, and that's why. Maybe there was an eclipse and that's what happened, and the path of the eclipse just happened to go directly from Palestine all the way to China. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe there's some other thing. There's a million examples of reasons why the sky could have gone dark that don't involve magic and that we know are possible and that we all agree happen sometimes. And what you're doing is instead saying, no. The only thing that can explain this is magic that we've never seen ever, that we're debating, that we're arguing on. You said you were going to get away from the supernatural, but your argument hinges on the supernatural. Do you understand now, where I'm having an issue?
Yeah, you're definitely misunderstanding me. That wasn't the top. That wasn't what I was saying. You asked me, was it logical? We were talking about logic. Logic is a topic right now.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about supernatural or should you accept supernatural. That's not what I'm saying at all. You asked, was it logical? And I said, no, it's not logical to dismiss something based on your worldview. That's all I'm saying.
And we're saying we're not doing that. Holy fuck!
Yeah, I'm not dismissing it, Dre.
I was answering the question. I know. I was answering the question. I never said you dismissed anything. I was answering your question, and that's it. It wasn't other pun intended. I was literally just answering your question. I was just kind of explaining why it wouldn't be logical.
Okay.
That's all I was doing.
Let's try.
Yeah.
Let's try one more. Let's try one more. Maybe this is a lost cause. Let's try one more thing. Just like, can you give us a good reason, something that we can all agree on, something that just something that tells us that your God is real, and anything at all.
All right, Jesus Christ.
What about him?
That's not supernatural. He's not supernatural, and he's proven to exist.
Yeah, he is.
Through.
Hold on.
Yeah, he's not supernatural. He's a real person. He was a real person.
Okay.
Wait. First, let's step by step. Do we all agree that there's a man named Jesus Christ that really walked this earth? Is that something we all agree on?
No, but I'm willing to allow it.
No.
I don't.
So,
no, I don't agree on that. I don't know for sure. I've heard different, historians and theologians saying different things. I'm not a historian or a theologian, so I don't have the capacity to parse through their ideas. But I'm willing to grant it. Let's for the sake of argument, we'll all agree that Jesus Christ, literally, there was a dude named Jesus who lived around that time. Is that good, John? You good with that?
Okay.
For the purposes of this conversation, yes.
Okay, so we're all going to agree right now, just for the sake of argument, there was a guy named Jesus.
All right. So what you said was evidence that God is real. First, just for the, hypothetically speaking, there was a man that walked this earth. His name was Jesus. He made some big claims. He confessed to be God. So if he was real, he claimed to be God, and he turned around and proved it with eyewitness testimony of the resurrection from the dead. Then that alone, you don't need no more evidence. You need no more evidence. It's historically, but we're speaking hypothetically.
So there's an issue.
Historical.
So there's the issue right away, is that there are plenty of people at that time and also today that claim to be God, that claim to be the Son of God, that claim to be magic people, that claim to have supernatural powers. There's plenty of people, both in Jesus's time and even right now. There are people with millions of followers that claim to be gods today. And so just because he claimed it doesn't mean anything. Just because he existed doesn't mean anything. Those are all different claims. Now, you said he proved it. How did he prove it that we can actually all agree on and verify?
Well, first off, let's establish the topic. You asked me for evidence that God exists. I'm not saying the Bible is true. I'm not saying Jesus Christ really lived. What I am saying is historically, it's consistent and logical that if there was a God, and the evidence would be Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ claimed to be God. History backs him up, and the resurrection backs up his claims.
But
that's what I'm.
But just a second ago, I just mentioned there are a lot of people who have claimed to be God and have claimed to be different gods and have claimed to be the sons of gods. And there are followers. There's Satya Sai Baba is one that I bring up all the time. I might be mispronouncing his name. I don't have it in front of me, but this was a guy that lived in India. He died about a decade ago. He had millions of followers who all said that he could walk on water, that he could raise the dead, that he could heal the sick. This was a real dude who lived in our lifetime and claimed to be a god and had millions of people believing in him and saying that they saw with their own eyes that he was doing these miracles. I don't believe in him any more than you do. So what you're telling me is there's this guy named Jesus and he lived a couple thousand years ago and people said he did some cool stuff. Okay, I'll grant all of that. There was a guy named Jesus. He lived 2,000 years ago and people said he did cool stuff. People said he performed miracles. That doesn't convince me of anything any more than the Satya Sai Baba convinces you of anything.
Right, and here's the crazy part. I'm very unbiased. I look at everything from multiple angles. I get all the insight. The guy you're talking about, 9 times out of 10, he may have actually walked on water. He may have raised people from the dead. He may have done things, or he may have had people in place to influence lives for him. I can't say what he did. I wasn't there. You feel me? I've never even heard of the guy. But I'm not going to completely dismiss that this guy did some cool stuff. like how you said, I'm not going to completely dismiss the fact that he may have did some cool stuff. So
I get a
what I am going to say is he did, and there's no eyewitness testimony saying that he rose from the dead. That's what I will say. So
I'm so sorry, Dre. I got to jump in on this.
Yeah, you go first, and I got something.
There are no eyewitness accounts for Jesus whatsoever. The ones that you're referring to are the Gospels. The Gospels are not based on eyewitness accounts. They are fabrications. So the people that wrote the Gospels, they went to pagan schools, and what they did when they went to pagan schools and they were taught how to write in Greek, they were taught to write in Greek by copying previous stories and changing the details a little bit and then making up their own, story. And so that's why we see a lot of things that coincide with like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey and all this other stuff, and some of the later Gospels and everything like that. But more importantly, the Gospels change so much. Each Gospel is a response to the previous Gospels, or at least an extension of the previous Gospels, or some kind of reworking of the previous Gospels. We don't have any kind of evidence as to what kind of sources informed the Gospels, so we can't even say what sources they pulled from, even if they were eyewitness accounts. The earliest account that we have, I know I'm going really fast with this, but the earliest accounts that we have about Jesus is actually coming from Paul, and Paul only ever tells us that he got his information from visions and from scripture. So literally the entirety of Christianity is built off of a few people's hallucinations, as well as them reading the scriptures a little bit too closely and reinterpreting things. That's all that's based on. There's nothing to suggest that Jesus did any of the magical shit that he is said to have done. Not even Paul reports magical shit other than appearing as a vision to Paul. And then I'll let Forrest talk now.
Yeah, I would throw in there that, like, even if we're going to talk about the supposedly eyewitness testimonies of the resurrection, all of those are from the Bible, and even those in the Bible are terribly inconsistent. So, like, if you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John across these Gospels, they all give completely different stories. One of them says that when the people got to the tomb, the stone was already moved. Another one says that there was an earthquake and then the stone moved. Somebody says that there was an angel sitting on top of the stone. Another person says that the angels appeared behind the people when they got to the stone. Other one says there were no angels there whatsoever. Some of them say the angels were inside of the tomb. Some say they're outside of the tomb. Was it 2 angels? Was it 3 angels? Was it 1 angel? They say the body of Jesus was in the tomb and then it ascended in front of them. Others say that it was already gone when they got there. Some of them say that a group of women saw it and came back and reported to everybody else, and that they weren't actually there to see it and it was just secondhand. Like, even just in the Bible, the stories are completely inconsistent, and that's largely because of what John just explained. And so, like, the eyewitness testimony you're talking about isn't reliable. And what I want you to understand, Dre, is that, like, if I were to give you any other thing, if I were to talk to you about, like, the Easter Bunny, and I said, yeah, but I've got a 2,000-year-old book which has 5 different stories about the Easter Bunny that are inconsistent with one another and that don't line up with one another, and therefore you should believe in it, you wouldn't. There's no, I respect you enough to say that you would not believe anything if I gave you the evidence that you're giving me for Jesus.
All right, so I'm glad y'all went there. Because I went here myself. All right, so just to confirm what you're talking about, I was reading over the Gospels, and I noticed, like, it was the part where it was talking about Peter was going to deny Christ 3 times. On each account, the scenario was different. In one account, Peter was walking, and a woman was following him. And one account, a woman kept meeting up with him. She wasn't following him, but he kept bumping into somebody else. And the woman just happened to be there or something like that. And on another account, there was no woman. So I get what you're saying. It's exactly what you're saying. But if we have to take into consideration that these are different accounts from different people, if we both see a car wreck right now, we're going to not have the same exact story on what happened. Can we agree on that?
Correct. Yes, you're absolutely right, which is why eyewitness testimony is, like, the worst form of evidence. We have cross-examiner here who's a lawyer, and he's back in the. Am I right in saying that is, like, the worst? He's giving me a big thumbs up. Yes. So we have a lawyer here in the chat room with us that's pointing out that, like, yes, eyewitness testimony is the worst form of evidence for that reason. It kind of blows that that's the only thing you're giving us here as far as, like, believing that Jesus resurrected, because we have only bad eyewitness testimony from one book that is heavily biased.
I want to hold on. I want to add in here. So the Gospels are written in a very specific fashion. So the Gospels, Mark written most likely either right at 70 CE, just after or just before, and then Matthew was written and basically has access to Mark, does have access to Mark, and so he takes Mark's Gospel, changes it a little bit, adds a few things to it that he wants to add to it, and everything like that. And then what you have is Luke coming in about the 90s. Some scholars place him in the 2nd century, maybe, but around the 90s or so, you've got Luke that comes in, takes both Matthew and Mark, and then combines them and uses some from one or the other, disagrees with Matthew on some things, disagrees with Mark on some things, creates his own narrative, adds to it, and everything like that. And so then we've got John, who has access to all three of them in one fashion or another, and decides to write a gospel that's completely different than the other gospels, totally turning over a lot of the messages that are contained in the previous gospel. So basically what you have is one witness who claims some magical supernatural shit, and then other people years and years later that take his story, change it a little bit, and then proclaim it as their own. So you don't actually have 4 different people or different people claiming these things. You have one person that has no citation of sources, has no verifiable authorship in it, has no way of knowing whether or not he got it from firsthand eyewitness accounts, and then other people change his account. That's it. That's all that you got, and it's not impressive.
All right, so first, let me just address the eyewitness testimony. I'm going to come back to that, what you just said. First, it is 100% proven that eyewitness testimony can put somebody in jail for life. So that's not even a debate or argument. Eyewitness testimony in court can put somebody in jail in life. So that's not even a debate, bro. Like that's.
Are we talking about
Dre,
court though?
Yeah, Dre, I'm sorry to interrupt you because we were just talking for a long time, and I realized you just started speaking. But like, is that really the point you want to make? Like, yes, eyewitness testimony can put someone in jail for life. That doesn't mean that it's good or reliable. That's just a means that our justice system kind of sucks. Like, that's not really a good argument for what we're talking about here. You admitted yourself a moment ago that if we both saw a car wreck right now, we would have different stories. So the question is eyewitness testimony good? Not whether or not it's used.
I put it like this. I'm not going to say whether it's good, bad, or reliable, but what I will say is eyewitness testimony has to be taken into consideration.
It's not eyewitness testimony.
It's not eyewitness testimony though.
Can we agree on that? Can we agree on eyewitness testimony has to be taken into consideration at the very least?
Sure. Yeah, I can agree on that. It's just the issue is that's not really a factor at play here. I can also say that DNA evidence needs to be taken into account, but we don't have any of that either. It's kind of an irrelevant point.
I get you. Okay, so let me go back to what he was just talking about. The whole date.
And also, I'm sorry. I really do apologize. I really don't mean to be cutting you off so much. But this cross-examiner, who is again the one of our other hosts, he's a lawyer. He just put in our host chat here. We have found hundreds of people on death row that were convicted by eyewitness testimony and later exonerated by DNA evidence. So even just to your point that this is a very powerful thing. It is because it is so fallible. It is such a big problem. And while, yes, you should take it into account, you should not put as much weight on it as you are putting on it.
I get that. And I don't disagree at all. Not at all. I get that. I was just saying, it's a point of consideration. That's the only point I was making. Okay, so now to the dates where he was talking about these different scriptures were written and how they was written. Now we have to apply logic. So this is why I said in the beginning, history, consistency, and logic. So logically, everything he just said is not logical, bro. It's not logical at all. Everything he's talking about when the scriptures came out, the dates, and 90 AD and all that, is not logical at all. First off, we have to know that Jerusalem was taken down. The Israelites were killed. Some of them escaped. Some of them were captured. We know this happened in 70 AD. Now let's apply the scriptures. We know that one of the earliest known Paul letters to the churches, to the Roman church to be precise, I believe, was 39 AD. We know that Paul, another one of Paul's letters was around 50 or 55 AD. Let's just take that into account first. Now, when we look at that right there, Paul was quoting from the Gospels.
No, he wasn't.
He was scripture about the Gospels.
No. Okay, so he patently
that?
wasn't. I can actually prove this. I can prove this. So Paul was not quoting from the scriptures, and one of the biggest indications of this. And I'm sorry that I'm going to be speaking really fast right here. I'm just trying to get through this as fast as I can.
We got to go anyway, so go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically in Mark, there's this statement about, divorce and all of this stuff. I believe it's either divorce or taxes. I can't remember which. But in either case, one of those particular topics, the Mark has Jesus saying these things, right? Well, then if you go and you look at Paul talking about the exact same subject, what Paul says is that this is not a commandment from the Lord. This is my own opinion, right? So he's totally separating like his statements on this particular topic. Again, I can't remember which one it is. It's either divorce or taxes. Sorry about that, but it's one of those two. And he says, this is my opinion. It's not a commandment from the Lord. But then Mark says, oh, Jesus actually says this thing that Paul said. And so as we can tell, and as scholarship has advanced in this particular field, that Mark was actually using Paul's epistles, like his letters to these various churches, in order to generate a lot of the things that Jesus says in his gospel, and a lot of the theology that appears in Mark's gospel. So we definitely know for a fact that Mark was coming after Paul. Paul was definitely writing before Mark, but Mark was never written during the time of Paul, and he was only written after Paul was was killed at some point through whatever kind of means. We're not exactly sure how he was killed. There's multiple different stories about that, but the fact is that Mark definitely comes after Paul.
That's not true, bro.
Okay.
Trust me, bro. That's his evidence. Trust me, bro.
Yeah,
you're not.
That's frustrating. Okay. Dre, listen, we've been on this call for 45 minutes, and I feel like we've really gotten nowhere because fundamentally we're having a disagreement over like what evidence is and whether or not it matters. So I encourage you to call back because I really do think that this was almost productive, and I feel like we could get somewhere. So we got to move on because we're already like 30 minutes overtime on the show, and we got one other call that the producers really want us to take. So we got to let you go, but I hope you do call back and talk to us a little bit more about this God and why you think it's real. Okay.